October 5, 2025. A quiet morning in Windsor turned into a thunderclap headline. The Prince and Princess of Wales have established a 150-acre security perimeter around their home, Adelaide Cottage. 5 days later, Britain is still debating what really lies behind the fences, a matter of safety, secrecy, or silent warfare within the Crown itself. Is this a fortress built to protect the future of the monarchy or to defend it from itself? At first glance, it looks like a practical step. Sources close to the palace describe it as a long overdue upgrade to royal security. But insiders whisper something different, that this massive lockdown is less about protection from the outside and more about tension from within. According to reports reviewed by The Times, Prince William personally authorized the establishment of the Windsor Secure Zone, covering more than 150 acres of parkland. Advanced motion sensors, biometric gates, and round-the-clock patrols will now shield the royal residence from intruders, press drones, and uninvited eyes. Yet, as with all things royal, nothing is ever just logistical. The story of the Windsor lockdown begins not with fences, but with fear. Fear rooted in a past that never truly died. When the Prince of Wales moved his family from Kensington Palace to Windsor in 2022, he called it a return to peace. It was meant to give George, Charlotte, and Louis a childhood untouched by the relentless London spotlight, closer to nature and to the Queen in her final months. But peace never lasts long in Windsor. Unlike the stone walls of Kensington, Adelaide Cottage sits wide open inside Windsor Great Park, surrounded by public paths and tourists with camera phones. It is beauty mixed with vulnerability, and for William, vulnerability is no longer acceptable. Friends say he remains haunted by the spectre of his mother, Princess Diana, her fatal chase through the Paris night, her pleas for privacy, ignored. That shadow, they say, drives every decision he now makes for his family. Still, not everyone in the palace shared his urgency. According to one senior aide, Queen Camilla didn't approve the expansion plan. She thought it made the family look paranoid, detached from the people. Another insider added that she privately warned Charles that such measures could turn Windsor into a bunker. But whispers go further. Several palace staff claim to have seen unfamiliar faces near Adelaide Cottage in recent weeks, strangers loitering around the tree line, sometimes with cameras, sometimes with nothing but patience. Security logs reportedly noted at least 2 incidents of attempted perimeter breaches, both brushed off as civilian mistakes. Yet one guard later confided that the timing was too precise to be coincidence. In royal circles, coincidence is a dangerous word. Observers now speak of a subtle power play unfolding behind closed doors, the Camilla faction versus the Wales camp. For months, Camilla has been consolidating her influence over the king's inner circle, while William and Catherine have quietly expanded their independence. The new security perimeter, though publicly framed as a family safety measure, may also symbolize a political boundary, one that Camilla did not draw. And that, according to a palace insider, is what truly angered her. Meanwhile, the public reaction has been far from supportive. Local residents, long accustomed to strolling through Windsor Great Park, now face restricted paths and warning signs reading, "No entry, Royal Security Zone." At several entrances, new boards have appeared overnight. Road closed. This gate is closed. Please use Ranger's Gate. To locals, they are just signs. But to royal watchers, they mark something deeper, the first visible line of separation between the future king and his people. Many accuse the royal couple of turning a public space into a private fortress. Social media erupted with questions about taxpayer funds, and several tabloids, notably those historically sympathetic to Camilla, ran editorials questioning William's isolationist tendencies. Still, royal commentators like Dr. Alicia Morton from King's College London defend the move. We're seeing the heir to the throne learn from the mistakes of the past. Diana's tragedy was that she had no shield. William's tragedy would be to repeat it. But as the debate rages, the larger story may be unfolding quietly behind the gates, a tale of trust eroding within the royal hierarchy. Security has become the public word for something far more personal, a struggle over who truly defines safety, influence, and the future of the monarchy itself. Because the fences now rising around Adelaide Cottage are more than metal and censors, they're a symbol of withdrawal, a sign that the next King of Britain no longer feels secure within his own palace walls. And somewhere inside Windsor, between those guarded trees and centuries of tradition, one question lingers, whispered, unspoken, dangerous. What exactly is William protecting his family from? The public? Or the crown? A photograph resurfaces, grainy, overexposed, showing Diana, Princess of Wales, shielding her face from a swarm of flashbulbs in 1996. It spreads online within hours, reigniting a haunting parallel, a mother chased to her death, and a son now building walls to keep the world away. 5 days after the Windsor lockdown, that image dominates British headlines. The question has changed. It's no longer why the gates are closing, but what memories forced them shut. Is Prince William protecting his children from the public, or from a history that refuses to stay buried? William's decision to fortify Windsor was not made overnight. Insiders say the seeds were planted long before the first fence post was driven into the ground, rooted in the trauma of losing his mother under the blinding glare of cameras. According to one close aide, William still carries an unspoken vow. Never again, not my wife, not my children. That promise, once emotional, has now become physical, 150 acres of it. In 1997, the world watched in horror as Diana's car crashed in a Paris tunnel, hounded by paparazzi. She had begged for privacy, for security, for a moment of peace. None came. 28 years later, her eldest son finds himself replaying the same script, different century, same stage. When the Wales family left Kensington Palace in 2022, many saw it as a practical relocation. But royal aides now admit that the move was deeply symbolic, a retreat from the city that devoured his mother. And in Windsor, William sought sanctuary. But even sanctuaries have ghosts. The family's arrival at Adelaide Cottage was meant to mark a new chapter, a smaller home, fewer staff, more school runs. Yet, almost immediately, the shadows followed. Locals reported seeing unmarked cars parked along the Great Park perimeter. Paparazzi drones began buzzing over the treetops. And worse, there were whispers of internal observation, with palace employees noticing unfamiliar figures near the cottage grounds. Security teams logged multiple near breaches. One veteran guard later told the Daily Telegraph, "It started to feel like déjà vu. Every lens, every shadow, every whisper, it all looked like the same pattern we saw in the 90 seconds. William reportedly snapped during one private briefing. According to an insider, he slammed a folder shut and said quietly, "My mother had no fence. That won't happen here." But within the palace, not everyone agreed with his urgency. Queen Camilla, described by sources as unimpressed, viewed the lockdown as excessive, a statement of paranoia, not prudence. She told Charles that William was overreacting, said one senior official. She said the monarchy must stay open, not hide behind barbed wire. The king hesitated, torn between his wife's instincts and his son's determination. Eventually, he gave his cautious approval, a compromise that satisfied no one. Behind the scenes, however, tension escalated. Some staffers loyal to Camilla accused William of weaponizing Diana's memory to justify his own isolation. Others saw it differently. A son reclaiming control from the very machine that once destroyed his mother. Royal historian Dr. Martin Graves called it the ultimate generational divide. For Charles's era, visibility meant survival. For Williams, visibility means danger. By early October, the Windsor Secure Zone was operational, steel barriers disguised as wooden fences, security cameras camouflaged within the hedges, footpaths sealed off with red signs and polite detours, road closed, please use Ranger's Gate. But as the infrastructure grew, so did the unease. Local residents began protesting the closure of public routes through the Great Park. Some carried placards reading, "Our park, not their fortress." Others voiced sympathy, recalling Diana's relentless persecution by the media. One Windsor resident told The Independent, "If I lost my mum the way he did, I'd build a wall too." Inside the palace, the emotional toll was evident. Catherine reportedly urged her husband to remain calm, reminding him that fear can become its own cage. Yet she too admitted feeling watched. One late evening, returning from a school event, she noticed a dark car idling near the park exit. When security approached, the vehicle vanished into the fog. An internal memo circulated days later described possible surveillance operations by unknown actors. The report never reached the public, but word spread quickly through royal staff corridors. Some began to suspect that the threats weren't only from journalists. As one palace guard confided, sometimes it felt like the watchers weren't outside the palace, they were inside. Meanwhile, Camilla's stance hardened. She reportedly told a confidant that William's obsession with the past is weakening the monarchy. Palace correspondents noted her absence from several public events involving the Waleses. The tension, once whispered, was now visible in body language and press photographs. For William, however, the fight had already shifted beyond politics. To him, this was about legacy, not just of his mother, but of the institution she both illuminated and defied. In private, he described the new security perimeter as a line between history and healing. Yet that healing came at a cost. Every gate closed around Adelaide Cottage became another reminder that the royal family's past was still very much alive. The fences may have been built for safety, but to many watching from beyond them, they looked like grief solidified in steel. Royal commentator Emma Sinclair summed it up in one chilling sentence. Diana's ghost doesn't haunt the palace halls, it haunts their decisions. As the sun sets over Windsor's newly restricted fields, the signs gleam red in the fading light. Road closed, privet access only. And somewhere inside those 150 acres, a young heir looks out the window, not toward the kingdom he will one day rule, but toward the mother he could never protect. If Diana's death taught him that no one inside the monarchy is ever truly safe, what will he be willing to sacrifice to make sure history never repeats itself? A motion sensor flickered near the west edge of Adelaide Cottage. Security logs recorded movement unidentified, approximately 50 meters beyond perimeter. Within minutes, 2 guards swept the area. Nothing. No footprints, no heat signature, only a faint impression on damp grass. Officially, it was dismissed as a false alert. Unofficially, it was the third incident in less than a week. Someone was testing the fences, not to break in, but to remind the Wales family that even behind 150 acres of silence, they were still being watched. Since the lockdown order on October 5th, Windsor had entered a strange state of tension. The park paths, once open to joggers and dog walkers, now ended abruptly behind metal gates and red signs reading, "Road closed." Locals slowed their steps, staring through the bars as guards patrolled with new intensity. The quiet of royal privacy had turned into something else, an atmosphere of quiet surveillance. A palace aide described it bluntly. "It doesn't feel like safety. It feels like someone waiting for us to blink first." The incidents began small. On October 6th, a groundskeeper reported seeing a man with a camera near the tree line. On the 7th, motion detectors along the southern path tripped twice in 1 hour. Then, on the evening of the 9th, a staff vehicle parked outside Adelaide Cottage found fresh tyre marks near its route, prints from a model not registered to royal security. A royal protection officer later told The Telegraph, "It wasn't random. Whoever was there knew exactly where the cameras didn't point. By October 10th, William had ordered a full internal sweep of the Windsor grounds. The family was moved temporarily to the main residence, while technicians combed through footage and communication logs. Officially, this was described as a routine inspection. In private, it was anything but. Sources close to the prince described him as focused, not frantic. But behind the calm exterior, there was rising unease. "He's seen this before," one aide said. "It's the same playbook his mother faced, intrusion disguised as curiosity." And then came a whisper that cut deeper than any alarm, that the watchers might not be outsiders at all. An internal briefing noted a vehicle repeatedly spotted near the park's south gate, a black Range Rover, unmarked but cleared by palace access weeks earlier. Its entry authorization, investigators found, came from an office associated with Queen Camilla's private staff. The document was quickly classified, but in Windsor, secrets rarely stay buried for long. Inside the walls of Adelaide Cottage, the discovery cast a shadow over every conversation. Catherine, already unsettled by the growing security presence, reportedly asked her husband if the leaks could be traced. William's answer was quiet but final. "They're not leaks, they're messages." According to multiple insiders, he believed the strange sightings were not attempts to breach security, but rather to intimidate, a signal that Camilla's influence reached even into the supposedly secure heart of Windsor. "She disapproved of the fence," one courtier told The Guardian. "Now she's showing him how fragile that fence really is." By the morning of October 11th, the atmosphere had shifted from caution to confrontation. Senior aides at Clarence House and Kensington Palace exchanged terse messages regarding protocol breaches and inaccurate media reporting. The tone, according to one observer, felt like diplomacy covering for distrust. Camilla, meanwhile, was reportedly furious that rumors of her involvement had begun circulating among journalists. During a private briefing at Clarence House, she allegedly snapped, "If William feels hunted, it's because he's the one hiding." Charles, caught between them, refused to comment publicly. Behind the scenes, however, the king authorized additional security resources for Windsor, a move palace watchers interpreted as quiet validation of his son's concerns. Out in the park, the signs told their own story. "Road closed," "No entry," "Royal Security Zone." The same phrases that once meant order now carried the weight of paranoia. Locals whispered about strangers in the trees. The press circled, but could only photograph gates and silence. For the first time in years, Windsor felt less like the symbol of royal tradition and more like the front line of an invisible conflict. That night, as the family settled under heightened protection, one security officer recorded the final note of the day's log. "Perimeter clear. No movement detected. Area quiet." But minutes later, a second guard swore he saw a figure standing at the far edge of the estate, motionless under the fog, too distant for cameras to capture, too close to ignore. When the patrol reached the spot, the ground was empty again. Only a crushed blade of grass remained, and the faint smell of cigarette smoke carried by the wind. By October 11th, the fences were secure. But inside Windsor, trust was not. The Wales family was safe, for now. Yet the question lingered in the dark beyond the gates. Who was truly watching whom? Right after the last patrol light cut through the mist and the incident logs declared Windsor clear, a different alarm began to ring, not from fences or cameras, but from the corridors where budgets are born and loyalties are measured. The threat outside the gates had gone quiet. The pressure from above had just begun. If fences defend a family, who defends the right to build them when the crown itself becomes the obstacle? The first sign was subtle, almost polite, a request for clarification on the scope of the 150-acre security zone. It arrived not from security, but from the offices that sign checks and shape narratives. Words like proportionality, public perception, and value for money floated through the memos, bureaucratic, bloodless, and razor-sharp. In palaces, Knives don't gleam, they circulate as spreadsheets. William's perimeter had solidified, the public paths were rerouted, and the family had exhaled. But right after the quiet came an administrative squall, a joint review of security expenditures, a communications note urging greater openness, and a suggestion that some responsibilities be rebalanced across households. Rebalanced, a gentle word for reined in. At the centre of that push sat Queen Camilla's circle. Seasoned operators who understand that optics can starve a project long before a budget line is actually cut. They didn't need to tear down the fence. They just had to make it look too expensive to keep standing. A document flickered across the Wales team's screens, a draft brief for senior courtiers. The line that froze the room read, "Consider the reputational risk of creating a fortress narrative around the House of Wales." Someone had underlined fortress narrative twice. In the margin, a tidy hand added, "Alternative, recalibrate to family, friendly visibility, reduce cordoned acreage to essential footprint." The authorship was veiled, but the fingerprints were unmistakable. This wasn't police strategy, it was palace politics. Insiders say Camilla herself had been blunt in private. If you lock down the park, you lock out the people. Her allies took the phrase and worked it into bullet points, then briefings, then trial balloons to friendly columnists. Subtle, deniable, effective. Within days, editorials appeared asking whether the heir's household had become insular, overcautious, even aloof. The point wasn't to win a debate, the point was to soften the ground, so when the knife came down, it would feel like common sense. Analysts noticed the choreography. A budget review lands, and newspapers echo concerns about scope creep. A comms leak hints at shared royal resources, and talking heads suddenly discuss fairness across households. It sounded neutral. It wasn't. Security veterans muttered what every professional knows. You never shrink the perimeter when surveillance is unresolved. But money talks louder than doctrine, and image talks loudest of all. The Wales camp argued risk matrices, duty of care precedents, and the precedent from Balmoral and Sandringham. The counterargument did not contest the risk. It questioned the scale, the symbolism, the story. Right after the first meeting ended in stalemate, fresh pressure arrived from another angle. Philanthropy schedules quietly reshuffled, joint appearances rearranged, briefings delayed. The message was procedural on the surface. We're streamlining diaries, but strategic underneath. Starve a household of stage time and you shrink its sunlight, and you weaken its case. Catherine kept her poise. Those close to her say she pressed for transparency without capitulation. "We adjust routes, not the reason," she told staff. The reason, to her, was simple. 3 children, a mother's memory, and the hard geometry of risk. The routes? Negotiable. The line around her family? Not. William, for his part, moved like a chess player who knows the board is tilted. He authorized a technical annex to the security brief, heat maps of prior incursions, drone flight paths, timestamps lining up with press activity that no one had publicly claimed. He didn't accuse. He illuminated. Let the facts disgrace whoever they happen to outline. Across the chessboard, Camilla's advisors countered with an elegant gambit, pilot transparency. Open a handful of peripheral paths under monitored hours. Invite a local paper to photograph cheerful dog walkers. Plant the idea that the fence is flexible because the family is. If the public breathes easier, the purse strings tighten. If the purse strings tighten, the perimeter shrinks itself. Then a line appeared in a private summary headed for senior eyes only. Exploring efficiency options, staged drawdown of non-critical acreage, consolidate patrol routes, reassess night coverage on low-traffic quadrants. The translation was obvious to anyone who's ever guarded a boundary. Blink, and your blind spots multiply. A senior protection officer pushed back with a single sentence. Threats do not respect rota. It circulated, uncredited, like a quiet protest pinned to a notice board. Meanwhile, whispers thickened. Had a former communications hand, long friendly with Camilla's press, offered informal advice on shaping the narrative? Had a sympathetic columnist been promised access in exchange for a softer line? No proof, only patterns. But in royal history, patterns are often the proof that matters. The public felt the tremor without seeing the fault line. Some residents grumbled about blocked jogs and longer detours. Others nodded grimly and said they remembered what happened to Diana. For every Fortress Windsor headline, there was another asking how many fences it takes to keep a family whole. The debate itself became a weapon. The more the question lingered, the easier it was to call the perimeter excessive. Commentators framed it as a generational philosophy. The old school believed proximity preserves monarchies. The new school believes proximity attracts threats. Both are right. That's the conflict. And right after the confrontation moved from hedgerows to boardrooms, the monarchy's paradox stood center stage. Serve the people, and you must stand where they can reach you. Protect the heirs, and you must give them room no one can cross. Behind doors that never opened to cameras, King Charles heard both songs at once. The spouse who mastered survival through the press. The son who learned survival as a counter-surveillance plan. The father paused, as fathers do when love and duty pull in opposite directions. What he chose to say, or not say, would not decide the feud. It would define the weather in which it raged. Right after the audits, the editorials, the careful smiles and careful schedules, two truths faced each other across Windsor's invisible border, a mother's legacy that demands vigilance and a consort's creed that demands visibility. Somewhere between them, a king weighs budgets, a prince redraws maps, and a queen counts headlines like votes. So the question isn't whether the 150-acre fence will stand, it's whether the story told about that fence will starve it or save it. When power speaks in balance sheets and briefings, who guards the line that grief already drew? And if the pressure keeps rising from above, what breaks first, the perimeter or the peace? The fences were meant to protect Windsor. Instead, they became its dividing line. Within days of the palace's review leaking to the press, Windsor Great Park turned from quiet countryside into a stage of competing narratives. One side saw safety, the other saw privilege. And between them, the royal family once again found itself fighting for control of its own story. Outside the main entrance to the park, the first protest began on a damp Saturday morning. A dozen residents, then 50, then hundreds. Placards read, "Our park, not their fortress," and 150 acres of fear. A woman in her 60s shouted into a handheld megaphone, her voice trembling with emotion. "This land belongs to the people, not to their paranoia." News crews arrived before noon. Drones hovered above the demonstrators, ironically echoing the very problem the fences were meant to solve. On camera, a few protesters admitted sympathy for William's fears. "He lost his mother to that madness," one man said. But most spoke of something else. Frustration. The sense that another piece of Britain's shared space had been quietly sealed away, another symbol of distance between ruler and ruled. By evening, Fortress Windsor trended across British media. The tabloids had found their storm. Royal correspondents called it the most serious public backlash against the Wales household since their move from London. The tone shifted overnight from curiosity to accusation. Headlines began asking if William and Catherine were out of touch. And, notably, the loudest voices belonged to papers historically sympathetic to Queen Camilla. According to palace insiders, the Wales team recognised the fingerprints, the timing of the stories, the framing of the language. It wasn't coincidence. You could see the orchestration, one aide said quietly. It was the same old press machine, only this time turned inward. Across Windsor, photographers positioned themselves outside the newly marked no-entry zones, capturing images of the barriers under sunset light. The contrast was cinematic. The couple who once symbolized openness now framed behind metal fences and signs that read, "Private access only." The narrative took shape quickly. William, the isolated prince; Catherine, the overprotected duchess; their family, an emblem of retreat in an age demanding visibility. Inside the palace, frustration deepened. Advisors from Clarence House argued that the protests proved Camilla's point, that locking down Windsor damaged the monarchy's image. Her allies, emboldened by the headlines, quietly pressed for a measured rollback. The suggestion sounded mild but carried weight: trim the perimeter, reopen some paths, and issue a friendly photo op, something pastoral, something human. But the Wales household resisted. William saw the backlash as proof that the system could not be trusted. He refused to perform normality for cameras while his children were being watched. Catherine agreed. "It's not the people we fear," she told a confidant. "It's who hides behind the people." The standoff widened. Public appearances were postponed. Statements grew carefully worded, almost sterile. The couple who once defined the image of modern royalty began to vanish behind briefing notes and controlled exposure. Outside, the protests continued. Local politicians weighed in, promising to review Crown Estate access. Editorials demanded transparency over costs. Even tourism boards complained of declining footfall around Windsor's outer paths. But through the noise, a quieter current ran beneath: sympathy. Polls showed a surprising split. While many opposed the security zone, even more believed the Waleses were being targeted unfairly. "We've seen what happens when the press gets too close," one BBC panelist said. "Perhaps we should remember why those fences exist." By midweek, the air around Windsor grew electric. Every gate, every cone, every warning sign was photographed, shared, debated. Commentators called it a national Rorschach test. People saw in the fences whatever they feared most about modern royalty: secrecy, control, fragility, grief. For William, it was none of those things. It was mathematics, of risk, of loss, of legacy. The fences stood because the world doesn't forgive second mistakes. At a private meeting between senior courtiers, tempers reportedly flared. One official warned that public patience is thinning. Another countered that public patience isn't the issue, their safety is. No resolution, only silence, and the quiet knowledge that every decision would feed another headline. Meanwhile, Camilla watched from her wing of Clarence House, reading the morning papers with the precision of someone counting votes. The coverage tilted in her favour. Queen calls for openness. Palace sources urge perspective. Even when she didn't speak, the echo favoured her. But power built on headlines is brittle. Behind the flash of approval, new fractures formed. Senior staff began whispering about unintended consequences. A former press secretary confided to The Times, "She may have won the narrative, but she's losing the family." By the end of the week, Windsor was quiet again. The protests faded. The cameras moved on. The fences still stood. But inside the palace, the damage was done. Trust had eroded not from intrusion, but from exposure. The Waleses learned that even safety can become scandal, and that silence, in the age of spectacle, always speaks loudest. Because in modern monarchy, every wall has two sides, one that guards and one that reflects. The storms that began at Windsor did not end with the protests. They simply went quiet, absorbed, like rain into old stone. The fences still stood, unbent and unmoved, but inside the palace, something far more fragile had shifted. Right after the cameras turned elsewhere, the silence became almost unbearable. For weeks, no one spoke publicly about the Windsor crisis. The official line was simple: security arrangements remain under review. But inside the walls, the review had become a reckoning. Those close to the family say the distance between William and his father widened to the length of a corridor, long enough for courtiers to stand between them. Messages were passed through aides, not words. Charles was said to be weary of confrontation. William was simply done explaining. Camilla, meanwhile, thrived in the vacuum. Her briefings continued subtly. Never accusations, only questions. Do we really need this much space closed off? How do we look to the public? Is this what Diana would have wanted? Each inquiry was a needle, threading influence through hesitation. And yet, behind the polished diplomacy, unease grew. A whisper from Windsor became a rumour in London that certain unknown observers had been traced and that their information had flowed toward a circle uncomfortably close to the Queen's communications team. Nothing provable, nothing official, but enough to make even loyal courtiers stare at the floor when the King entered the room. Late one afternoon, William arrived at Clarence House unannounced. There were no photographers, no staff, just the sound of doors closing behind him. Those who caught glimpses said the meeting lasted under 30 minutes. No raised voices, no visible emotion, but when he left, his face was pale and determined. The next day, Palace insiders reported that the joint review of Windsor security was concluded. The result, the perimeter would remain unchanged. Funding restored. Oversight transferred directly to the King, bypassing all other offices. Charles's approval was official, but quiet. He gave no statement, no defense. The signature appeared on the document without ceremony, as if ending a chapter no one wanted written. For Camilla, it was a rare defeat. The press that had sung her tune just a week earlier now fell silent. The Fortress Windsor story evaporated as quickly as it had risen. But the damage lingered, in side glances, in withheld invitations, in the chill that now followed her through the palace corridors. At Adelaide Cottage, life resumed its slow rhythm. The children returned to school. Catherine began appearing again, measured but composed, her public smile sharper than before. And William, he spent his mornings walking the perimeter alone, often stopping at the western edge of the property where the ground slopes toward the park. Guards say he never speaks during those walks. He just looks past the fences, into the tree line, where the mist always seems to hang a little heavier. Once, a staff member overheard him murmur, "This is where she would have stood, if she'd had the chance to stop it." No one asked who she was. They didn't need to. Behind the scenes, the monarchy began its slow, silent recalibration. Public schedules were revised, joint appearances quietly rearranged, and new press guidelines drafted under the name of family coordination. It was the polite language of power redistribution, subtle enough to seem routine, precise enough to matter. William and Catherine, though outwardly compliant, began asserting their independence. Their communications team was reorganized, their security made fully autonomous. Officially, it was to ensure operational efficiency. In reality, it was the first step toward a different kind of crown, one that learned, finally, that transparency without protection is just exposure by another name. And Camilla, still smiling for photographers, sensed the shift. Influence, she knew, rarely ends with a scandal. It fades in whispers, in looks not returned, in doors that no longer open as quickly. One evening, a pale winter sun fell over Windsor Great Park. The gates stood silent. The same red signs, road closed, no entry, glowed faintly in the dusk. A single black car drove through the service route, the one only a handful of people knew existed. Inside sat the Prince of Wales, window lowered, the wind cold against his face. "Do you ever think it's enough?" Catherine asked softly. He looked ahead, past the signs, past the hedges, toward the horizon where the land curved into mist. "Not yet," he said. But one day, by morning, a new headline appeared in the Times. King Charles reaffirms support for Prince William's security reforms. No quotes, no context, no comment from Clarence House. Just a clean headline, the kind that ends a story without answering a question. And somewhere deep within the Crown estate, the cameras kept their quiet watch, the fences kept their line, and the ghosts of the past, mother, stepmother, monarchy, all kept their distance from one another, for now. Because in the end, Every heir lives under two shadows, the one cast by the crown above him and the one left by the love he lost below it. Thank you for joining us through The Windsor Shadow. If you believe the story of the monarchy is far from over, subscribe, stay tuned, and keep watching, because beyond the fences of Windsor, the next chapter may already be unfolding.